Hey, welcome back, everyone. Now, something we're into today, frankly, are a bit concerning, to say the least. Folks, Russia has begun rolling out nuclear armed ships. This is the first time it's done it in 30 years, or roughly around there. They've also suspended the New START treaty, which was a agreement made under the Obama administration to start scaling down the number of nuclear weapons. And at the same time, you also have China weighing whether it's going to start supplying Russia with weapons, and this is becoming a red line for the United States. Basically, the way things are heading, it looks like Russia is being pushed towards China. They did not have they had somewhat of an alliance. They're now building a very solid alliance, and for the world, this is actually a very bad thing. This is the country with the most resources in terms of land mass and oil and natural gas, coming together with the country with the most people. India might be a close second, and also very serious global ambitions. The alliance between the Chinese Communist Party and the Russian Federation, especially as they both move to oppose the United States and the Western world, is actually a very big thing. And so let's go into what's happening right now. I want to kind of detail what's happening with these ships, detail where things are at with, frankly, talks of war. Biden on President's Day went to Ukraine, met with Zelensky, giving them more money. Americans are going to start paying even the pensions of Ukrainians and start supporting them financially. There's going to be indefinite support for them. There's a lot going on right now. And of course, they also announced new sanctions against Russia. The Biden administration announced new sanctions. And Russia's basically, well, their media is saying this is an act of war. Let's go into it, folks. First, though, those of you on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Facebook, we will jump over exclusively to Epic TV after about 25, 30 minutes or so be sure to join us there. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into the first story. I want to show you Yahoo News. And it says Russia deploys ships armed with tactical nuclear weapons for the first time in 30 years, says Norway. So I want to be clear, this is not just hyperbole. This is not me trying to be sensational. This is what's happening right now, at least according to Norwegian Intelligence. It says here that Russia has started deploying tactical nuclear weapons armed vessels in the Baltic Sea for the first time in 3 decades, according to a Norwegian intelligence report. The report released by the Norwegian Intelligence Service on 13th of February states that the vessels belong to the Russian Northern Fleet, reported the New Voice of Ukraine. The fleet's warships regularly went to sea with nuclear weapons during the Soviet era, but this is the first time the Russian Federation has deployed them, the report stated. And it says the key part of the nuclear potential is on the submarines and surface ships of the Northern Fleet, it said. Tactical nuclear weapons are a particularly serious threat, you don't say, in several operational scenarios in which NATO countries may be involved. The intel report added that Russia also has submarine capabilities, anti-satellite weapons, ASAT weapons, which the CCP also has, and other capabilities that could threaten Norway. Remember, this is Norwegian intelligence, so they're looking specifically at threats to Norway. Now, folks, first time in about 3 decades that we've seen them do this. Now, I would say on two sides. One, this is an obvious show of force. Russia is basically saying, do not support Ukraine, don't come near us, don't challenge us, or we will be forced to use nuclear weapons. That is the message they're sending to the world. Because even Russia and China put together would have a very difficult time fighting the militaries of the world. If you were to have the United States step in, if you were to have Japan and other countries step in, especially against China, the CCP and Russia would have a very serious run for their money. As we're seeing right now, even Ukraine is giving Russia a pretty serious run for its money. Although keep in mind they have a lot more people, and we're even with the amount of deaths and the loss of military equipment we've already seen, they're going to be trying to drag this out. This is going to be something that could go on for years, based on the way it's heading. This is not going to be resolved anytime soon. And the Chinese Communist Party may step in as well. We know that the Chinese military is about roughly as strong as, if not a bit less so, than the Russian Federation. And the CCP would also have a very difficult time, of course, fighting a major war. But of course, if they brought nuclear weapons into the game or anti-satellite weapons into the game, it would change it quite a bit. And so this is the message they're projecting right now to the West. Remember also that Russia had talked about using tactical nuclear weapons or miniaturized nuclear weapons in regional areas in Ukraine. That would mean, of course, not like massive atomic detonations that would wipe out entire cities. This would be like nuclear detonations that would be a lot more localized, but would still be devastating and also have very likely a nuclear fallout, making that area you wouldn't be able to go to there without getting sick, without probably dying from nuclear radiation poisoning. This is something they're talking about. And frankly, even the idea of chemical weapons now or biological weapons is not off the table. I've been seeing a lot of reports, for example, that Ukraine itself has been using chemical weapons. I spent a long time trying to look into it. I'm on the fence. I can't decide. I can't figure out whether it's disinformation or whether it's legitimate. It looks like the accounts pushing it are mainly Russian accounts or Russian-tied accounts. And I know that the Russian Federation does have a very strong force that works specifically on creating like fake videos and trying to frame other people for it. They do this. I've actually worked directly on debunking some of this stuff in the past. I'm not saying it's that, but I am saying that it's hard to tell the source material. It's hard to find the source of some of this information. But there is relatively credible video evidence and articles and even claims from some Ukrainians that some of the drones they're using to drop bombs on, Russians on the field are using chemical canisters, which would violate some of the arms control laws and would give Russia pretty much an open window to meet Ukraine in like, which would be chemical weapons. Very disturbing stuff. That said, folks, before we go further, because I want to go into pretty much the whole picture of what's happening right now, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. And with inflation, this is pretty good, actually. Now, folks, as we've been talking about, inflation is going to continue, very likely get worse now. Even Fed Chair Powell is warning us to brace ourselves. Well, there's one way to hedge against inflation. American Hartford Gold makes it simple and easy to diversify your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. With one short phone call, they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or into your IRA or 401k. American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. Folks, if you call them now, they'll give you up to $2,500 and free safe on qualifying orders. So don't wait. Call them now. That's 877-260-2764. Again, 877-260-2764. Or text Joshua to 65532. Again, 877-260-2764. Or text Joshua to 65532. And again, big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring today's episode. In terms of aggressors and so on, it's complicated. I know that even Trump himself now is coming out and basically saying that pretty much the Western world, the Obama administration, the United States basically was involved in the overthrow of the former Ukrainian government, which was pro-Russia, replaced it with Zelensky, which is who is anti-Russia. And, of course, was involved in the color revolution that helped instigate and basically form that whole thing. George Soros is also accused of this. I'm well aware of the history. Russia believes it has historical ownership over Ukraine. The question is, how do you define historical ownership? Because if you look at the way like empires have changed over the thousands of years of human history, they've changed quite a bit. just about, many countries could claim historical ownership of many countries at this point. Britain could claim historical ownership over like a quarter or half of the world if they wanted to. The British Empire used to own all of you, so get in line. But of course, the former capital of Russia historically was in Ukraine, and so they do share a lot of cultural links. They basically view the taking away of Ukraine through this color revolution instigated by the West as being, well, what it was, which was essentially a coup, and they believe they're retaking it. Given they've invaded Ukraine, they're killing civilians, and it's terrible, I think, the human tragedy and loss that's happening right now. Now, the big issue at hand is this, and this is something that actually Tucker Carlson did a good job explaining recently, but going back to Trump and so on, and even what I've been saying for a while, this is the big picture. There was a major mistake made in the West, and that major mistake was pushing Russia away. Because when Russia was pushed away, where does Russia go? It goes to China. And during the Obama administration, they basically extended a friendly hand to Russia. They had the New START treaty. Remember, Hillary Clinton and Vladimir Putin had that little red button that said New START on it, and they pushed the button like they were launching nuclear weapons or something like that because it was a nuclear weapons agreement. Do you remember that? It's like lost history at this point. Hillary Clinton was involved in the green lighting of Russia getting control of uranium. Basically, our nuclear power plants rely on Russian uranium. And of course, we sold them the Canadian plants and other plants. Russia basically controls nuclear power in most of the world, gas power, and a lot of the oil industry. And of course, a lot of that has to do with just underhanded deals and so on, back when really the Obama administration was trying to cozy up with Russia. That changed, of course. Russia became the aggressor. They were framed as the bad guy. And then the Clinton campaign and the DNC fabricated, and I can say this in 100% accuracy at this point, because the truth has now come out. They fabricated false information, claiming that Trump had colluded with Russia to rig the 2016 elections. That was fake. It's now proven to have been fake. They fabricated information, and that drove a wedge between the United States and Russia. And that pushed Russia further and further away. And of course, Biden's rapid pullout from Afghanistan is also one of the things credited with Russia believing they had basically a green light to do whatever they wanted. Russia invades Ukraine, and here we are now in a war. The United States is now backing Ukraine in this war, and through sanctions, through open support of Ukraine, and even calling for the shelling of Crimea, they're essentially we're now getting to the point. We're now getting to the point where you could argue at this point that the United States is involved in the war. It's on the fence, but you could make that argument now that we are now in the war. Once you go from supplying humanitarian aid to maybe even supplying some arms, to the point where you're actually involved with calling for specific targets and strategy, that's where you begin crossing the line, and Russia recognizes it as such. What is happening now is what I did not want to have happen, and why I would have liked for Trump to actually, make friends with Russia and get close with them and pull them away from China. Because what we're seeing right now is the worst case scenario. Russia is moving to China. And that alliance being formed between Russia and the Chinese Communist Party is a terrible, terrible alliance. That is the realization of what many Russian strategists wanted and hoped for and called for. That's what Alexander Dugin called for, the unifying of the Eurasian region and the Russian control of part of the Eurasian region. He believes in his book, again, I read his book, so I was curious what he had to say. He believes that whoever controls the Eurasian region controls the world. And they believe they can use their resources and their weapons and maybe invasions to basically disable most of Europe. And they're well on their way to doing that. And they believe that they can basically just not cross the red lines with the United States and make sure the United States never gets pulled into it. And they're doing that. And here we are. And Russia has also now, as they're deploying nuclear weapons, and remember, for them, this is like the defensive line. For Russia, this is drawing a big, thick red line in the sand and saying, do not cross this line. Right? They're making nuclear threats. This is veiled nuclear threats. In addition to deploying nuclear weapons now, they're also ending the Obama era agreement to begin getting rid of nuclear weapons, which they never really did anyways, but this is symbolic. This is CNN. It says what to know about Russia's latest move on nuclear weapons. It says Russian President Vladimir Putin, his announcement Tuesday that Russia would suspend participation in the New START Treaty, a key nuclear arms reduction agreement, is the latest in a series of ominous declarations in which he has made reference to his nuclear arsenal. What specifically this latest move will mean in terms of the worldwide nuclear threat is something of a question mark. The treaty was already essentially paused since Russia has recently refused to open up its arsenal to inspectors. CNN's report notes that Putin is not technically withdrawing from the treaty, so this declaration appears to be formalizing its current position. Basically, that's where we're at. Again, back to my point. This is Russia drawing a line in the sand. What you're watching right now with the deployment of nuclear weapons, the suspending of this nuclear arms agreement to begin reducing the number of nuclear weapons, these two issues combined, and not to mention direct nuclear threats, are showing that Russia is drawing a big fat line in the sand and telling the United States, you do not cross this line. Basically, they're saying Europe is ours, and they, of course, even frankly, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline now being pinned on the United States and the Biden administration, even that could be considered an act of war. And Russia is regarding us now more and more like a military adversary and one in potential wartime. And basically, the message they're sending again is stay out of Europe. Europe is theirs as far as they're moving, at least. Now, meanwhile, what's happening? Biden visited Ukraine. He did this on President's Day, and there's been one update on this. It was actually this morning. Biden actually declared that they've announced the largest sanctions ever, or currently at least, put on another country. Basically, Russia is completely cut off from the Western financial system because of this. Biden says this is only the beginning. Biden is going to announce even more sanctions on Russia. Now, while I would take sanctions over open war or nuclear war, keep in mind what this means, folks. Keep in mind what this means. What happens if Russia gets sanctioned? What does sanctions even mean? It means that your businesses basically get cut off from the U.S. dollar-controlled financial system. The entire global financial system that uses the U.S. dollar, you are suddenly cut off from it. What's the problem with that? Russia is moving away from the United States. Russia is moving to China. And guess what? China has an alternate global financial system, which most countries on Earth have already joined on. The U.S. cutting Russia off is going to do nothing other than push Russia towards China and strengthen the entire CCP-led global financial control system, which they can use to even sanction us at this point. This is pushing Russia towards China, and this is one of the worst case scenarios we could have, frankly, in terms of where this is heading. But Biden, of course, went to Ukraine, and let me show you a bit of what he talked about there. This is CNN again. It says, President Joe Biden's surprise visit to Ukraine sparked anger and embarrassment among many of Russia's hawkish military pundits on Monday, increasing pressure on Vladimir Putin as the Russian leader prepares to justify his stuttering invasion in a national address. Biden's historic visit comes days before the one-year anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, providing a symbolic boost to Kiev at a crucial juncture in the conflict. But the visit caused fury in Russian pro-military and ultra-nationalist circles. Remember, this is CNN. When they say pro-military and ultra-nationalist circles, that's pretty much any Russian patriot. And you have a lot of, that's most of their country. Let's put it that way. It's not like a fringe group of Russians. This would be the majority of the population. And this says, as it upstages Putin on the eve of a major address in which the Russian president is expected to tout the supposed achievements of what he euphemistically calls a special military operation, the war in Ukraine we're watching. Now, with this, Biden has essentially declared indefinite support for Ukraine. The United States is going to support Ukraine as a proxy to wage war against Russia. Now, I can say, feelings and emotions and human cost aside, if you view this purely from a military strategy, it's technically a good investment. I can understand why the Biden administration would do it purely viewed from a military level. It's because basically, even before this, Russia and China were basically aligned. The Chinese Communist Party is, if you watch my documentary, The Final War, you know that they've talked about the need to get the United States involved in 4 to 5 different wars, depending on where they go with it. They believe that Russia needs to be an ally with this. Russia needs to distract the U.S. military in some regard and basically get the U.S. focused on them militarily. They believe that China would be another one. They believe that they were actually trying to use Brazil. And with Lula now in control of Brazil, keep in mind what that means. The new Brazilian president, Lula, is very close to Russia, very close to Iran, and very close to China, and very, very negative towards the United States, except for like the Squad. He's close with like AOC and those people. He is borderline communist. He is very, very far left, and he also is one of the main figures in what you call the Foro ao Sao Paulo. This is a forum mainly started between Cuba and Brazil, Sao Paulo, Brazil, also known as the Forum of Sao Paulo, which basically runs all the far left governments all through Latin America. Keep in mind where alliances fall, folks. Most of Africa is in the CCP's pocket. Most of Latin America is in Russia and the CCP's pocket, and even Iran, again, because of the control of the Foro ao Sao Paulo. Most of Asia, excluding Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, kind of South Korea, they're on the fence in terms of alliances. India, but many other countries there are very positive towards, or very deeply controlled by the CCP, and even those that are not against the CCP, of course, being within the CCP's region, are pretty big targets of it. India has always been on the fence. Under COVID, they began turning away from the Chinese Communist Party. But with Russia, they are historical allies. They've always had close relationships with Russia. India has always been kind of the Switzerland, in terms of like being neutral. They've always been kind of the Switzerland of the Asian world. And they would be Asia, technically. And, of course, most of the Middle East controlled between basically Russia and China through proxy or going back to Soviet era, Cold War era policy. And, of course, Eastern Europe, former Soviet bloc countries, many of which would be anti-Russia, but population-wise, you do have a weird nostalgia for it. Western Europe, anti-Russia, kind of cozying up with the CCP, but I think COVID turned it against them. This is where the cards lie. The remaining alliance against this system is the United States, Canada to an extent, Western Europe to an extent, and then Australia mostly, Japan mostly. Basically this is where the cards fall, folks. In other words, you're going to have the world divided into 2 basic systems. And especially with these sanctions, you're going to very likely, at least this is purely my analysis, you're going to watch even the global financial system divide in 2. You're going to have the CCP-led world and you're going to have the America-led world, and these are going to clash. Well, maybe other than maybe a miracle from heaven, which who knows with the virus, the way things are going in China, this is where the world is heading. Now, that being said, in addition to declaring essentially indefinite support for Russia, and keep in mind what that means, briefly, right? Indefinite support for Russia. On one side, you could view this as a financial investment to basically defeat the Russian military. This is pulling the teeth out of them. That is if they don't begin, operating their factories full scale, which, again, if they make an alliance with the CCP, with China, that's what would happen. China has the manufacturing capability. Russia could send the plans over. China could essentially mass manufacture Russian military equipment, and Russia wouldn't have a problem anymore. China has the manufacturing capabilities. Russia has the technology. The two of them aligned on this would mean probably one of the largest militaries in the world that could be basically created and mobilized very fast, especially with the resources combined between the two of them and the type of global alliances they could form. In terms of basically pushing, again, the division of the world economic system into two camps. This is something that we need to take seriously. But on the U.S. side, we're also exhausting our military supplies, our ammunition, our military vehicles, even our defense budget, and we're giving it to Ukraine. If you view that as an investment to basically try to disarm the Russian military, fine. But the problem is when you do that, you need to replenish it. Under normal circumstances, if you're going to exhaust your military supplies, you need to replenish them. You need to, if you're supplying that much, regard yourself as if you were in a wartime scenario and begin manufacturing new tanks and begin upping the manufacturing of ammunition and begin replenishing your military supplies. And America really is not doing that. We're disarming ourselves while believing we're disarming Russia. That's what's happening. Do you get that? Under the guise of destroying the Russian military, we are destroying much of our military. Not entirely, of course, because our ships and jets and stuff are another story, but this is what's happening. We're exhausting our military surplus. And as it happens as well, we're in a recession. Inflation is rising. The quality of living is going down. Our border is wide open. And if you understand Russian, Soviet history of sleeper agents and so on, and even their work with Iran and terrorist networks, that's a very big threat for us. A war with Russia at this point would not necessarily look like open war. A war with Russia would deeply involve subversion. It would bring out the worst parts of the Cold War. The proxy wars, the terrorist wars, the use of revolutionary cells and groups to launch terror attacks, to cause chaos, to begin launching revolutions in other countries and begin changing the world order yet again. This is the direction we are again heading towards. And I know for a lot of us, maybe of my generation, the idea that the world could be like this, feels like ancient history. It was not that long ago. It was really not that long ago. We had a very brief peacetime. And I again, this is where, and not to mention, as some of you are mentioning, a lot of Americans no longer support, a lot of Americans, of course, justifiably recognize the problems we have here. And so even American support for our own government, we are demoralized, we are destabilized. And the will to fight, you look at military recruitment numbers in the United States, the will to fight isn't even there for most people. And so this is the very fertile soil that Russia is basically benefiting from as they, again, form a new global alliance. And with this, Biden is also going to be bankrolling the pensions and even some of the social support systems in Ukraine. We're going to be basically paying people's living costs. Jack Posobiec actually published the video of this. Let me show you on Twitter actually what Biden had to say.
And to deliver much needed humanitarian assistance as well as food, water, medicine, shelter, and other aid to Ukrainians displaced by Russia's war, and provide aid for those seeking refuge in other countries from Ukraine. It's also going to help schools and hospitals open. It's going to allow pensions and social support to be paid to the Ukrainian people so they have something in their pocket. It's also going to provide critical resources to address food shortages around the globe and to deliver.
Now, get what's happening. Americans are having trouble even meeting basic living costs. You have a crisis of work. You have crises of the housing bubble, which is, if you look at the numbers right now, it's not looking so hot. We have already surpassed the picture of 2008 and the financial crisis. We're nearing the cliff financially. The financial markets and the workforce in the United States are being artificially propped up with illegal immigration. Now, keep in mind what happens when you flood a country with, let's say new people. You look at Texas, for example, where Californians have gone to Texas, and what's happening? The rents are going through the roof. The cost of living goes through the roof. More competition, higher prices, and if you have a limited number of homes and suddenly the demand for those homes almost doubles, what's going to happen to the price of those homes? Prices are going to almost double. This is being artificially done to us right now because Biden has thrown wide open the border. And of course, we're flooding America now with millions and millions of new people. While this is making life much more difficult for the average American, higher rents, higher cost of food, higher cost of living, again, higher competition, higher demand, prices go up. What that is doing is artificially maintaining the economy. Understand that. They are artificially maintaining the economy. And you can't do that forever. At this point, this is actually why I believe they're doing it, frankly. They're artificially propping up the economy. And while we're doing this, we're sending money to all over the world, and we're artificially propping up their economies. What happens when that artificial crutch gets pulled out? It's going to collapse. And as we move towards what could be a very real war, well, you oftentimes do see that following depressions, following times of major turmoil like this, you do see wars. It usually takes something that extreme to push people towards war. And let me show you this. This is Daily Mail. They're now saying our tanks will be parked on Moscow's Red Square, and that will be justice. This is the Kiev security chief vowing to expel Russian troops in Ukraine soil, dubbing Putin Hitler's twin, and saying that basically not only are they going to push Russia out, but they're planning to invade Russia afterwards. They're going to push the thing all the way back, and America might bankroll them the whole way through. This is a major threat. And this is something that Putin cannot easily pull out of now. There's a saying in Chinese, when riding a tiger, it's hard to dismount. There's a time where you can make peace. There's a window where you can make agreements and get people to the negotiating table and have a ceasefire agreement that has been artificially prevented from happening. There's allegations that America's involvement basically has pressured Ukraine into avoiding that. You could say at the very least that our supporting of them in this war has prevented that type of ceasefire from happening. And we are very rapidly losing the window where a ceasefire like that would be possible, because the people involved are too far in, and it's just like Caesar in the Civil War. Where basically in the final battle, Caesar told his troops, look, if you don't win, you're going to die. If you don't win, you are going to hang at the gallows. If you don't win, every one of you is a traitor and a war criminal, and you are going to die, so you might as well stand on this battlefield and die here or win. And those are your only two options. You win here or you die. That is where we are pushing artificially Russia to. That type of stance, which militarily, when you get people who know that they can't step back, that tends to be when they're most dangerous. And this is where we're at, folks. And Ukraine is saying, of course, they invaded our territory, they killed our women, our children, or the elderly and civilians. America has now declared that Russia has committed war crimes, and so you're going to watch, probably like war crime trials. Think Saddam Hussein hanging from the gallows. Do you think they're going to back down? Do you think they're going to back down at that point if they're going to die if they back down? In addition to this, Poland now believes that they're going to be next, and Belarus, according to alleged secret plans, is going to be next, meaning that Russia also has its plans to continue rolling through Europe because they have two choices: take more or lose everything. Here it says, according to Newsweek, Russian President Vladimir Putin must be defeated in this invasion of Ukraine because he is also looking to invade other countries in the region, the Polish Prime Minister has said. In an interview with the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, Mouts, I can't say his name, he told France 24 that Moscow is preparing for the next attack and that basically Poland is going to be the next target for it. Another article next up here from Daily Mail. Daily Mail is reporting that Russia aims to absorb Belarus by 2030. Folks, that's not too long away. If they want to win a war by 2030, that means within 7 years. Russia plans to absorb Belarus by 2030, according to a leaked document setting out plans to infiltrate the country. It says Russia is allegedly planning to annex Belarus and absorb it into the Russian Federation by the year 2030, according to leaked presidential documents. The secret dossier, reportedly dated the summer of 2021, was entitled Strategic Goals of the Russian Federation in Belarus and set out 3 possible approaches, short, medium, and long-term, to annex Belarus and restore a piece of historical Russia. Get this, though, because this is important to understand what war is going to look like now. We're going back to a Cold War state. It says the medium-term plan would see Belarus formally become Russia as early as 2025. That's 2 years away. Not even 2 years away at this point. While the long-term plan gives a timeline to frame even 7 years from 2023. It says the plans were reportedly drawn up by Russian Presidential Directorate for Cross-Border Cooperation, and it says they were obtained by Yahoo News and a German outlet. And the documents are verified as authentic. It would confirm that Vladimir Putin has ordered Russian intelligence servers and armed forces to prepare to annex yet another country, Belarus. Given this now, China is going to be the big thing. The Chinese Communist Party and its involvement with this is going to be the big thing. And the Chinese Communist Party has, in fact, basically shown that they're willing to cross many lines. The spy balloons are a small piece of this. But the hard line in the sand now with the Chinese Communist Party is going to be lethal aid to Russia. As I mentioned, people are clapping their hands and saying, look at how we're destroying Russia's military. Look at how they're destroying their tanks. Look at how fast they're losing their equipment. You have men on the field fighting with World War II era weapons. Not all of them. A lot of them have modern Kalashnikovs. And also very heavily customized Kalashnikovs. In other words, some of it's propaganda. And we're just going to have to get used to seeing a lot of propaganda from both sides. We're entering wartime. You're going to be watching propaganda. Personally, I would say maintain your opinions and your positions, but I would also say don't underestimate your enemies. That's a dangerous thing to do. But Russia is using, in some cases, World War II era equipment. They're using World War II era ammo, and they need more of it. And where are they going to find the manufacturing capability to get that? Well, guess what, folks? That's where China comes in. And if China opens the door for this, you are going to see this war possibly never end. As long as Russia has bodies to throw at this, not even that, because they could use drones, and China has drones. You're going to watch the full force of everything that we built in China for manufacturing capability become weaponized. And you are going to watch this new force basically be built. We underestimated them, and here they are now building a new military, essentially, if this moves forward. Before I go deeper into this, though, folks, let's jump over to Epoch TV, because there's still a lot. I'm going to go into the whole China element now and what's going on with this. The red lines in the sand. China's actually looking like it may invade Taiwan now. Be detailing this. First, though, folks, let me show you a trailer. It's becoming terribly relevant, I should say. I did a documentary called The Final War. We've now divided it into 6 parts, so you can watch it as a series. It's a lot to digest all at once. But this basically lays out the CCP strategy against the United States. Let me show you this, then we'll jump over to Epoch TV.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epoch Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China.
China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.
And folks, again, that's exclusively on Epoch TV. Check it out. It's a great series, and I think it's heavily educational, if not a bit depressing, and I apologize for that. But I'm not holding anything back. I'm just being blunt. So I do recommend watching it. If you watch that series, you will get a better understanding of where we're at with China than, frankly, most people would get in 10 years of studying the CCP. That basically just compresses a huge amount of knowledge that I think will really make things clear. That said, folks, let's jump over to Epoch TV, and I'll see you there. And folks, thank you for being here. Imagine a stick. You're saying, Joshua, can you please